The envelope slid off the top of a crooked stack of invoices and whispered across the smooth surface of his desk before coming to rest against the edge of his laptop. It looked wrong in his world, too small, too soft, too human among contracts worth millions and documents stamped with power. The paper was slightly smudged. The corners bent as if tiny hands had clutched it too tightly on a long journey. He barely glanced at it at first, irritation flickering in his eyes. Someone had messed up his perfectly ordered space. His fingers moved to sweep it aside, ready to dismiss it as nothing, when his gaze caught the uneven, childish handwriting scrawled across the front. For Santa. His hand froze in midair. Something cold curled around his chest. He stared at the words, a faint, humorless exhale escaping his nose. Santa didn't visit men like him. Santa didn't step inside glass offices that floated above the city like cages. Yet without understanding why, he picked the envelope up. The paper felt thin, fragile, warm from the touch it had last known. He turned it over slowly, and for a second the world faded into a blur of lights beyond the window, the city, reduced to a distant, irrelevant glow. With a careful motion that surprised even himself, he slid a finger under the sealed flap and opened it. Inside, a folded sheet of paper held a drawing made in dull, worn crayons. A tiny figure of a girl stood next to a larger outline, faceless, unfinished. The hand on one side stretched toward empty space. The simplicity of it was devastating. Beneath the drawing, in crooked, uncertain letters, a sentence trembled on the page. "Dear Santa, please send me a dad." His throat tightened as if the words themselves had hands around it. He didn't blink. He just stared as a strange, sharp ache stirred somewhere deep inside his ribcage. He had signed billion-dollar deals without a flicker of emotion, buried men in negotiations, destroyed companies with a single decision, but this felt heavier than anything he had ever held. The word dad echoed in his mind, a ghost he had buried long ago, now rising uninvited. Outside, the city moved on, horns blaring, lights flashing, unaware that something, small and fragile, had just split, opened the heart of a man who believed himself untouchable. He slowly lowered the paper, his thumb brushing over the tiny stick figure as if it were alive, as if it could feel him, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence in his office wasn't empty. It was painfully, terrifyingly full. His jaw tightened as if instinctively bracing for impact. But there was nothing to fight, only paper, ink, and a child's impossible wish. Still, he reread the sentence again, then again, each time slower, as though repetition might dull the sting. It didn't. The word dad struck at a place he had boarded up long ago, a place he'd sworn would never feel anything again. A muscle in his cheek flexed, betraying a storm building behind his carefully controlled expression. Around him, the office hummed with faint electrical life, the soft buzz of the ceiling lights mingling with the distant murmur of traffic far below. A world in motion, unaware that inside this still glass box, something had cracked. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, staring at the skyline through the towering windows. The city glowed arrogantly, indifferent and cold, just like he'd taught himself to be. He'd built an empire out of isolation, convinced loneliness was a small and necessary cost for power. Yet now it clawed at him from every shadow, no longer a quiet companion but a screaming presence. He imagined a small room with peeling walls, a flickering bulb, a tiny hand gripping a broken crayon, carefully shaping every letter in desperate hope. The thought settled into his chest, heavy and unbearable. He exhaled slowly through his nose, trying to shake it off, to return to the man who calculated, not the man who felt. But his hands refused to move away from the letter. His thumb traced the rough outline of the childlike drawing, lingering on the empty space where a hand should have met another. A space waiting to be filled, by someone, by anyone. For a split second, an image he never allowed himself to summon flashed in his mind. His own childhood, a silent house, a door that never opened, a figure that never came back. He blinked, forcing the memory away, but the pulse in his chest only grew stronger, more violent, like a heart remembering how to hope. The office suddenly felt too large, too quiet, too hollow for a man who'd just been seen by a child who didn't even know his name. And in that heavy silence, one undeniable truth crept in, wrapping around his thoughts with terrifying, undeniable clarity. This letter wasn't meant to find Santa. It had somehow found him. Across town, in a narrow apartment that smelled faintly of damp walls and cold cement, the little girl pressed her back against a cracked door and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. The thin wood trembled slightly with every muffled sob that escaped the bathroom. On the other side, her small hands were clenched at her sides, knuckles pale, as if she could hold the door together just by force of will. The light above her flickered, buzzing weakly, casting her shadow in broken pieces along the wall. She turned her head and listened, heart pounding with each uneven breath of her mother, the sound of water running in the sink trying to hide the truth that bled through anyway. Grown-ups always thought water could erase sadness. She knew better. She had learned that loneliness had its own sound, and had always found a way to be heard. Pushing herself to her feet, she walked slowly to the small table in the corner. Her drawing lay there, wrinkled and soft from being touched too many times. Another sheet of paper rested beside it, a perfect, careful copy of the letter she had already sent. She traced the words with her finger. "Dear Santa, please send me a dad," as if tracing them again might make them real faster. She pictured the North Pole the way she'd seen in cartoons. Warm lights, busy hands, someone kind and strong reading her words and nodding in understanding. Her lip trembled, but she swallowed the fear back. She wouldn't cry. Crying was for adults behind locked doors. Instead, she lifted the page and pressed it to her chest, whispering into the quiet room, "Please hurry, Santa. Mama is getting weaker." The words dissolved into the air, soft and brave, a child's prayer disguised as a wish. Behind her, the bathroom door creaked as another painful sob echoed through the thin apartment walls. And in that moment, the drawing in her trembling hands felt less like a dream, and more like their only chance left. The conference room blurred around him as voices rose and fell. Charts glowing on the screen, numbers stacked in aggressive green and red. But none of it reached him. His name was said more than once. Questions aimed in his direction, waiting for decisions that usually came like sharpened blades. Today there was only silence. His gaze had drifted back to the folded paper hidden in the inside pocket of his suit jacket, the faint outline of its edge pressing against his chest as if it had a pulse of its own. "Sir?" Someone tried again, a little more nervous this time. He didn't answer. In his mind, the city had faded, replaced by the image of a small hand clutching a broken crayon, of wide eyes waiting for something impossible. The word Dad echoed again, raw, aching, insistent. It made the polished table in front of him feel unreal. What was all this power for, all this control? If a child somewhere believed only a stranger in a red suit could save her. He stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the floor. Every conversation dropped into stunned silence. "I need a moment," he said, his voice lower than usual, carrying a tension that stopped any protest before it began. He walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall, past assistants who straightened in confusion, past walls lined with awards that suddenly felt meaningless. Reaching his private office, he closed the door with a firm final click. His hand slipped into his jacket and pulled out the envelope again, unfolding the paper like something sacred. His eyes found the faint, almost hidden return address in the corner, a smudge of ink, half faded but still readable. A chill ran through him. It was real. She was real. For a moment he just stood there, staring at those crooked lines, as if stepping over them would change everything he had ever been. Slowly he picked up his phone, his thumb hovering in the air. One call and he could have an entire report on the building, the street, every person inside it. He had done far worse for far less reason, and yet his hesitation was heavier than fear. It was the weight of a line he had never planned to cross. Then he began to type the address into his phone's map. His heart started beating faster, not with panic, but with something dangerously close to purpose. He grabbed his coat, yanked it from the hanger, and without another glance at the room that defined his empire, he walked out. Behind him, the door to his office shut on a life made of glass and steel. Ahead of him waited something unknown, fragile and shaking, and he was already moving toward it. Rain streaked down the windshield in crooked, trembling lines, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of gray and flickering streetlights. He barely noticed the traffic slowing around him, the impatient horns, the glow of storefronts closing for the night. All he could see was the navigation dot inching closer to its destination, each turn tightening a silent knot inside his chest. This part of the city was different, older, worn down, forgotten. Buildings leaned toward each other like tired strangers, their walls stained with time, their windows dark and hollow. When his car finally came to a slow stop, an unfamiliar stillness pressed in around him. He lifted his eyes. The building in front of him was smaller than he expected. A tired, crumbling structure with chipped paint and iron rails rusted by too many winters. One stairwell light flickered like it was fighting to stay alive. And there, behind a darkened second-floor window, stood a tiny shadow. A slim silhouette framed by thin curtains, unmoving, watching the street below. Watching him. His breath caught. For a moment he forgot how to move, how to think. He simply sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. Rain tapping softly against the glass like a nervous heartbeat. The shape at the window didn't wave. It didn't disappear. It just waited, as if it had been standing there long before his car arrived, as if it had somehow known. A strange warmth curled inside his chest, battling the fear, the doubt, the danger of what he was about to step into. He imagined small feet resting on a cold floor, a child peering out into a world that had given her little reason to believe in miracles, and still she waited for one. The parts of him that had long been numb began to throb as if waking from a deep sleep. His fingers loosened from the wheel. He reached for the door handle, then stopped. A final wave of hesitation washing over him. This was the edge of everything. The edge of the life he had built. The edge of something he didn't understand. His eyes found the window once more. What if this isn't meant for Santa, but for you? The thought echoed in the quiet car, steady and terrifying and soft with hope. And as the rain continued to fall around him, he finally opened the door and stepped out into it, letting the cold soak into his clothes, into his skin, into the moment he would never, ever forget.